Good morning. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to the Protecting Your Brand webinar. We have a few house rules to go through first. The microphone is already muted. Only the speakers will be able to share their video and their screens. During the event, you'll be invited to add your comments using the chat function. There will be a specific Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So during the presentations, please make a note of any questions you may have. If your question is not answered during the presentations, then please, as I say, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. After the event, we will send you a copy of the slides and, if requested, a recording of the presentation. With that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers today. First of all, we have Carol Berman, who's Managing Director of MAD HR Ltd, followed by Bill Ward, who's the co-founder of Ward Trademarks. And after that, we have Darren Chapman, who's the Director and Principal Security Consultant at Cyberscale Ltd. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Carol Berman.
Good morning and welcome. What I'm going to cover in my session is, in the 15 minutes that I have with you, is what is employer brand? I'm also going to talk about why is it such an important topic for your business, and 4 tips that you need to put in place in order to protect it. So, Andrew, can I ask if you can move on to the next couple of slides there and the next one? Thank you. So first and foremost, employer brand, what is it? If you think about any place that you go to purchase something or a product or a service, that you're going there for a reason, and part of that reason can be because actually that brand makes you feel good, or you like to be associated with that brand, or actually you believe that that brand is good quality. And from that perspective, when you look at it from a marketing perspective, they're looking to attract you as a customer. Employer branding is exactly the same, but what you're doing is you're trying to promote your organization or your company as being an employer a choice to a particular desired target group of people to work with. And that target group, as it says on the slides, can be your current employees. So what you're doing is you're using the fact that actually you're a really great place to work, therefore why would anybody ever want to go and work somewhere else, as well as to other key stakeholders in the external market. So that could be active, passive candidates, so these are prospective employees, equally your clients, your customers, people who are wanting to feel assured that they're being the product or service is being delivered by a quality group of people, and other key stakeholders that you may operate within the world of your business. Next slide, please, Andrew. So when you are thinking about your employer brand, I think the first thing that I will say when we work with clients is, who are you as an organization? That isn't the same question as what is it that you do, but who are you as an organization? So this is, what's your vision? What's your values? What do you stand for? What do you not stand for? Who do you like to work with? Who do you not like to work with? All of those things enable you to start building up a picture of the type of organization that you want to be. And what should happen is that should run congruently with the type of employer that you want to be too. So, for example, if you are, operating in the premium market, you wouldn't expect as an employer for you to be paying minimum wage. There would be an expectation that would be commensurate with the type of organisation that you are, that this is a source of benefits that you would get by working with that sort of employer. Next slide, please, Andrew. So it's important. And the reason it's important is I've given you 3 great reasons, and I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So the first one is, if you think about as your business grows, the level of contact that you as a business owner or as a senior manager will have with your clients could be very marginal. It is actually your team that work with your clients and your customers much more than you do. So what you need to do is make sure that people who work for you understand what your USP is, so that it flows through in terms of the standards and delivery of service that they give to your clients. So that could be how they seek to add value. It could be how they act as an ambassador for your business. I think it's fair to say we've all been into companies, into businesses, whether it be a restaurant or a supermarket, and you've overheard people talking about how their day has gone. It leaves you with an impression about that organisation. But if your team are continually happy and engaged, then that flows through in terms of the level of customer satisfaction that you have, which obviously then leads to higher profits. So it's really important to make sure that there is alignment in terms of everything that you do optimizing your USP and flowing it through to your clients. When it comes to competing for talent, sometimes actually people aren't, as long as their salary expectations are met, they are actually in a position whereby there is so much more that they want to work for or want to benefit from in terms of working with an organization. So for example, we have marketing companies that we work for, and they are always looking for great web developers. But actually for a web developer, they're quite happy as long as a level of expectation is being met regarding salary. The thing that really excites them is actually the type of work that they're going to be doing. Are they going to be doing things that are going to push them professionally and enable them to get greater experience, because they see that in the longer term, that enables them to optimize their earning potential moving forward. When you're competing for talent, when recruiting, if you are focusing on your employer brand, then actually you won't have to pay agencies quite so much. So your cost per hire will become lower because people will see you as being, or see your organisation as being the place to come and work. Equally, it becomes a faster time to hire. What that means is that if you think about from deciding that you need to recruit to then that person starting with you, the longest part of that process, obviously, usually is the period of time between when you put the advert out and when you start getting those applications. So the opportunity of getting good quality applications right from the get-go of that advert going live is absolutely critical. But equally, it's important to make sure that you respond to those applications quickly, because not all of them will wait until the closing date. So make sure that you keep that process moving. But as I say, it will enable you to compete for talent much more effectively. Equally, and really importantly, is when you recruit your existing team and you induct them, you get them engaged in your business and the passion that you've got within your business, you don't really want to lose them. You want to build on their skills. They develop great relationships with your customers and your clients. You want to make sure that you retain them. By them understanding how unique your own organization is, it means that actually what you don't do is you won't suffer with problems of lower employee turnover. And obviously, anybody who leads a business creates a trail of disruption. Meaningless, although they don't mean to take, the fact is that somebody's going to new come in, there's got to be a handover, there's got to be changes in process, you've got to induct. That all creates disruption, and that is time and money for your business. So the ability to be able to retain your core staff and make sure that you keep them happy and engaged is absolutely critical, and brand plays such an important part in making that happen. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do is we're going to share with you some 4 top tips. This is a really deep topic to go through, but I'm just going to try and give you some 4 key headlines that you can take away with you after the webinar today. So tip number 1. Next slide, please, Andre. Thank you. So in a time of crisis, and let's be honest, the last 18 months to 2 years, that's felt like how most businesses have operated. What can happen is those businesses have tended to focus on everything else in terms of where are they going to look after their customers, how do they keep the PR piece going. And the danger with doing that is actually the people that are having more interaction with your customers are actually your team. So it's important to make sure that you continue to focus on your people, because that is how you will control public perception. It will be how you keep your customers, and it will be how you will weather that storm and ensure the survival of your business. Because actually, if you can keep your team motivated and engaged, then they will start seeking out opportunities because they're part of that journey with you. Next slide, please, Andre. Communicate proactively, consistently, and considerately. Those are three big words. I think the thing I would always say is, and again, when we work with clients, there are times whereby clients will say, well, let's not say anything. Well, we're not ready to communicate that yet. And that's absolutely fine. But what you've got to be aware of, in the absence, in that void of people communicating with authority and with authentic information, you're in that situation whereby rumours will take on a life of their own. People will start to communicate, whether they are, and speculate. Whether they are right doesn't really matter. The fact is that those rumours will start generating an interest in further continue that discussion. And unfortunately, the way rumours generally start is there may be a grain of truth. By the time it's like a game of Chinese whispers, by the time it gets to the end, something much bigger has happened. So it's always important to make sure that when you are communicating, you do so proactively, consistently, and considerately, because, as I say, it will avoid confusion and it won't negatively impact your culture, because actually you're being honest, you're being authentic, and you're being your true you. Even when the pandemic hit, when I talked to our own team, there were times where I had to say, I don't have all the answers right here, right now. But the moment that we start formulating plans and we start thinking about what that might look like, we will talk to you. And that's exactly what we did, because it was a first for everybody. So, as I say, remember, proactively, consistently, and considerately. Next slide, please, Andrew. Everything that you do, should be aligned in how you run your business, in terms of your culture, your brand, the company ethos. Being true to that means that acts as the compass in making sure that you are continually able to be authentic, because it's your true you. Our business is a values-led business, and we always say to our team, if ever we are not living up to any of our Paris values, then please challenge us on it, because that's exactly the way that we live. The thing is, though, is that if your words and your behavior don't match as a business leader, you will lose credibility. You lose credibility, you lose the trust of your workforce, and that's something that you can never afford to do. So it's important to make sure that you're always your authentic self and be true, and make sure that everything is aligned. These moments, particularly the last 18 months, 2 years, these are moments that matter. The whole situation that we have been through has enabled and provided businesses that have really and truly engaged and worked on their culture prior to the pandemic are really reaping the rewards of it right now, because actually what they've been able to do is see that people don't need to be micromanaged. People do understand the opportunities that exist within the business. They do see those opportunities, and even though they're now working remotely, and some of them still are, actually that's proven to be highly successful, because people get it. They find opportunities to collaborate, but actually they're quite capable of working independently and don't need to have quite so much line manager contact, because they're empowered to make the right decisions for the business, because they understand what the business is about. So as I say, every time you look for those opportunities, those moments that matter, to reiterate who you are as an organisation, strengthen your culture, drive your loyalty, and align what your employee values most, which is a thing called EVP. Seek those opportunities out, because they are like gold dust, and they will have such a positive impact on your business. Next slide, please, Andrew. Top tips to protect, number 4, plan for tomorrow, today. So I regard focusing on your brand and culture is something that you have to ensure that you put the time in to focus on. It's interesting, as I listen to a lot of leadership gurus, and the one thing that they all say is actually their roles now running businesses is less about running the operational aspects of their business. They have a team of people that do that. Their role ostensibly is now about developing the right culture and the right type of organisation that they want, by making sure that the behaviours within the organisation are flowing through. So it's really, really important to make sure that you keep that focus on and make sure that you listen, communicate transparently, share your vision for the future. When I started this business in 2014, I didn't dream to be in a position whereby we would have a team of 10 people. But actually, every single person who has joined the business, when I talked to them about what was it, and they just said your passion, your energy, your enthusiasm, it's infectious. And who wouldn't want to be part of that? But the only way that you can do that is by making sure that you have a clarity of vision, and actually make sure that what I want in terms of my ambition for the business is the ambition of the people that I'm recruiting as well. And I say that's something that we help our clients with too. So I'm recognising we're running to time. So if the bits that I've covered today is what's employer brand, why is it important, and 4 tips, top tips to protect it. Thank you very much for your time. We have got, if you're wondering where to start in your journey, you'll see this when you get the PDF. There is a link there for you to take an organisation review. So it's an opportunity for you to self-analyse your own organisation and to answer some questions, just to see how you score. That will help you to see where perhaps some of your priorities might lie in how to make the best of your HR activity to great effect. And as I say, it focuses on compliance, administration systems, right the way through to employer brand and engagement. So thank you very much for your time. And Andrew, back to you.
Thank you very much, Carol. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Bill Ward of Ward Trademarks Limited. Over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, really looking forward to this. It should dovetail in very nicely with what Carol has just been talking about, because I'm going to, just over the next 15 minutes or just under, speak to you about the importance of trademarks in respect to how that links into your brand. So next slide. Let's get started. So trademarks, I mean, they are a fundamental business asset. Not everybody really realizes this, but as companies grow and thrive, it becomes more and more important. So what I'm going to talk about just covers 3 elements: is what are they exactly, trademarks, and what makes a good one as opposed to a mediocre one. And then finally, the most important bit is what is a good strategy for protection. Next slide. So trademarks are many things, but bread and butter, mainly, they are words and logos, or words or logos. You can have a word on its own, you can have a collection of words that maybe form a phrase, or you can have a logo that is just a piece of artwork like the Nike swoosh tick, or it incorporates words as well. So they're all around us. Every business has at least one. And I'll just name 4 here underneath: Aston Martin, Virgin, Tesco and Paul Smith. Anything from luxury cars to Virgin, which covers a multiplicity of different goods and services, and Tesco and Paul Smith, which is a well-known brand in the fashion space. I added that one in because it's also a common name, and there's a popular myth amongst business owners that if it's a name, it can't, as in a person's name, it can't be trademarked. Basically it can be trademarked, although there are certain restrictions, which I won't go into here. So underneath, we've also got a collection of some logos, which are all brands from the East Anglia area. What's the difference really about whether you decide to major on one or the other? Well, really, you need both. If you can get a trademark protected and get the word done, that's the gold standard. But if you have a strong logo which is distinctive and memorable, and it's an important part of your branding, don't overlook that. It's not a binary choice. You are very strongly recommended to have both of them protected. Next slide. So the benefits, why do we do it? So I've got three strands to this, and the first one is having a look from the consumer role. And really, there's a little bit of history. If we wind the clock back 150 years or so, how did people decide what it is that they wanted to buy? How did they differentiate products from one source or another? It was hard because products were sold under very generic, descriptive names, flour or milk or whatever it was. But as the commercial world sort of grew in sophistication, these trademarks that started to emerge, they performed a very valuable function because they were a badge of origin. They tell the consumer, where does the product come from? And that's really important because you can leverage that as a business owner. If you walk down the aisle of the supermarket and you're looking for your favorite cereal, you like cornflakes, if every cereal had a box that said cornflakes on it and just some were in just different colors from one another, you'd be scratching your head and you wouldn't know what to choose. But if Kellogg's happens to be your favorite cereal, you just walk there and go straight to Kellogg's because you know that if it says Kellogg's on the box, that's what's going to be in the box, to coin the phrase that they used to use, and you put it in your trolley. So it developed where the trademarks assisted consumer and still very much assist consumers to make successful purchase decisions and help a consumer to avoid low quality. The trademark itself is sometimes consumable. So an extension of this function is where people, if you start to develop something more, if your brand goes up the scale in terms of luxury and status, then look at the bottom there. There's Apple, Rolex, Mercedes. Apple as a brand, we all have seen the news where they're launching the latest iPhone at a given date, and the queue of people around the block who are sort of queuing overnight to get to the front of the queue to get the first thing when it's off the shelf. Rolex and Mercedes are just randomly chosen luxury brands. They carry an element of status as well. So if you are a purchaser of a Rolex watch or a Mercedes-Benz car, then maybe it is because it's saying something to you about your status as being able to drive such a car or wear such a watch. Next slide. So coming back to the business owner, the principal benefit is that it obviously will allow you to reap the benefit of a good reputation, because if your brand is known for quality, if you have a good and memorable trademark which is registered, and I'll come to the registration piece in a minute, then you are able to reap that benefit at the exclusion of all others. It doesn't mean that you won't have competitors, but what it does mean is that no one will be able to compete with you with the same or a similar name. They might be able to compete with you with the same or a similar product. But if yours is the brand that everybody wants, then that is one of the key reasons to invest some hard-earned effort to getting yourself solidly built up in your trademark world. So also, trademarks inform consumers as to the existence of the brand itself. So if you are putting your trademark out there in the marketplace, all the usual places, it's in print, it's in on social media, wherever, whatever is your sort of favorite marketing channel, if your brand is out there, then it is working for you and it's performing an advertising function. It's informing consumers that your brand exists. If they're curious about it and they don't know much, they might go and look it up, see what it's all about. If there's a bit of a buzz, then they'll come along and then perhaps make a purchase of you. Next slide. So this is really where all the action is, because if you have a trademark, what is the most desirable aspect is that you want a monopoly in it. It's no good having a really distinctive and memorable name and branding if someone else can come along and think, well, that's a successful company, I'm going to make my name similar or the same with similar branding, and I'll be able to ride off their coattails. If you get the trademark registered, then in exchange for that registration, you now have the exclusive right. And you're able to display the orange circle next to the trademark. And in effect, it's a contract between you and the government. All businesses that have a registered trademark, they're entering into this contract, which is, what is the government doing for you by giving you a monopoly? They are basically rewarding you for your entrepreneurship, which is good for the economy, and it's good for commerce. So underpinning the registration is a whole sort of statute, legal structure based on statute law, and it allows you to take action against counterfeiters and infringers and all sorts of other wrongdoing, commercial wrongdoing that is, that could ride off the back of your coattails. And you're able to do so in a much more cost-effective and straightforward way because of the tools that exist on the trademark statute law that is there for you, which it's not available to you if you're not registered. You have to use a much more old-fashioned, tortuous, expensive, and stressful method. I'm not going to talk about it in this presentation because it's off the topic. So just to recap on the benefits, it's what they do for the consumer, tell you who the brand is, who owns, what is the source of the brand. They allow the business owner to capitalize on the good reputation, and they allow the business owner, provided you're registered, to have the monopoly, and that's the key thing. So let's just have a look at what makes a good trademark. Next slide. So just very quickly, these are a distinctiveness spectrum of what makes strong as opposed to weak trademarks. Unless a weak trademark is one that is harder to enforce, a strong trademark is easier to enforce. So I'm not going to talk all the way through that slide. It's quite busy. There's quite a lot going on there. But what I would say is that if you are starting and you're thinking of a new brand, try and aim for the middle. Suggestive ones are the best. And if you're then going to then go, but don't deviate to the left, go for the middle or go to the right. If you go for the made up words on the right, those are words that are not in the dictionary. They're very easy to enforce, but you have to invest a lot of marketing capital to explain to consumers what it's all about. So next slide, please. If we look at, this is just a rather hand-picked selection of leading global brands. And I just invite you to have a bit of a scan across. And you should notice that they're all highly distinctive. There's nothing in there that is generic or descriptive. And if I was to put another 50 brands on there, they would all be the same. You just won't find enduring, thriving brands in the very generic world of trademark choices. Contrast this to the next slide. So on this slide, I've made up a good number of these, but they're not all made up. Some of these are actual trademarks or actual business names. But once you see this sort of thing in the marketplace, it becomes more confusing. You see something once Are you going to remember the difference between the English Spirit Distillery and the English Spirit Company, or the English Drinks Company, the Norfolk Cake Company, or the real Norfolk Cake Company? You know, that's what's going on there. Who is who? Which is the better one? What's the one I really want? I can't remember. And the lesson in it is that it's quite tempting to choose those sorts of names, because you have to make less effort to educate your potential and your future customers as to what your product is all about. But my God, it is so much more difficult to enforce this, and you'll always be having tussles with people that are using similar names. Next slide. So wrapping up, the strategy for protection in this order is: 1, choose your brand name and do that bit first, then search or choose a selection of names that before you go ahead and register, or before you go ahead and actually invest in all the marketing collateral. So you choose, you search, get it cleared for registration, which is a professional piece of work, and then register it. Register. Can't emphasize it strongly enough. Some people just don't do it because they think it's, well, too expensive. And that's okay if you prefer not to. It's not compulsory, but if you want to avoid hassle in the future, then definitely it's the way to go. And then, only then, invest in your branding and marketing collateral, especially if you're rebranding or you're starting out. If you've already done so and you're well established, well, then you should be able to, you've already existed in the marketplace, so you should be able to get it registered. And I would still recommend that step. And finally, police your brand during its lifetime. No one else will do it for you. There isn't any magic that comes from the Intellectual Property Office where they look after your brand. You have to curate it and protect it yourself by taking appropriate enforcement action. That's it. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Bill. In just a moment, we will be joined by Darren Chapman of Cyberscale.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, Carol and Bill. Thank you for setting up my part of the presentation very nicely, Bill, because I think your point 5 in terms of policing your brand is really what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about one aspect, which is that there's an aspect of which can really damage your brand and your reputation of your organisation, and that's cyber attacks and the often resultant data breaches. So that's what I'm here to talk about. We deal with a lot of organisations, and we look at cybersecurity and cyber resilience from a risk perspective. And one of the real key risks for all organisations now from cyber attacks and data breaches is reputational and brand damage. And so we're going to dig into a little bit of why that is, and then we're going to focus on one key thing that you can do to help in that regard, which is often overlooked when we look at your cyber security and your cyber resilience. So next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. So I don't think you can fail to be aware of the number and the severity of cyber attacks and data breaches that happen nowadays, and obviously there's lots of them in the media which tend to focus on the larger companies and the larger data breaches. I think it's really important to highlight that whilst those are the ones that you see and those are the ones that you hear a lot about, this happens to smaller companies and local companies in our region all the time, every day. They just don't necessarily make the national press, but obviously there still is a reputational issue there. One of the things that when you do hear about these big cyber attacks and data breaches is it seems like they're all described as highly sophisticated cyber attacks. And so I want to just have a think about why that is. And also, is it true? Are they all actually really sophisticated cyber attacks? So hold that thought, and we'll come back to that as we go through the presentation. Next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. So we always like to talk about some statistics, and there's plenty of statistics out there around data breaches, etc. And on the ones on the left of this slide are fairly typical statistics that get quoted. So they're all about the number of cyber attacks, the volume of cyber attacks, and clearly that's not getting any lower. But the ones I wanted to draw your attention to a little bit more are the ones on the right-hand side of the slide. And these are really less about the number of cyber attacks and data breaches, but they're more about the perception of clients and consumers and customers when a cyber attack happen. So it's about the perception of the company or the organization that is attacked or is breached. And those are victim companies. So they're victims of the cyber attack. And you can see that just from those statistics on the right-hand side, that if as an organization you suffer a cyber attack and you're looking after people's data, and there's a data breach as a result of that, it perhaps doesn't go down very well with your customers or your clients or even your potential clients. Next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. So you might have noticed that on the last slide I referred to the organisations who suffer these cyber attacks as victims. And they are victims because they're victims of a crime. So a cyber attack and a resultant data breach is a crime. And it's outlined in various pieces of legislation. Mainly there's one called the Computer Misuse Act of 1990, which is actually being revised. You've also got Data Protection Act as well. But the key thing to kind of understand, I guess, is that a cyber attack is a crime. But the fact that it's a crime sometimes gets a little bit lost. So if you look at it from a consumer point of view, and the organization that is holding your data is breached, and data that is about you comes into the public domain or is otherwise compromised, then the fact that that's the result of a crime sometimes gets a little bit lost. And actually, the perception of the company who's ultimately a victim is damaged. So there's a good quote here, which is that when a breach is revealed, the attacked company is portrayed not as a victim, but sometimes as negligent and in a subtle way complicit in the event that ultimately exposed partners and customers. So my question is, I think, my question is that fair? Is it a fair assessment that if you're the victim of a cyber attack as an organization, is it fair that you're seen perhaps not as a victim always, but maybe complicit in that? If you think about a sort of a parallel or an analogy, if a bank was robbed and they're looking after your money, and they didn't have much in the way of security in place, then they might suffer the same way. They might suffer the same perception. But if they do have a lot of security in place and they can be seen, and this is what obviously the case with most banks, if they are seen to have done everything that they reasonably could have done to protect that money of yours, then they perhaps would be seen more as a victim. So there is definitely a factor here as to what is it that you're doing to protect the assets that you're looking after on behalf of other people. How does that then play out if there's a scenario where that's compromised? Next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. So some kind of home truths, I guess. Many companies, lots of organizations don't do anything like as much as they really should be doing to take care of their clients and customers' data. So remember that data has huge value now, particularly, and GDPR is one thing that's kind of helped to highlight that, is that the data that organizations hold on people, which they need to do to run their business, has value. And that's really why cyber attacks are so much more prevalent now, because of the value of that data. But many companies, through lack of understanding or maybe lack of intent, don't really do anything like as much as they should do to protect that data, and they know it. And that's why really that you get this highly sophisticated attacks, because from a perception point of view, there's a huge difference between being a helpless victim and a complicit victim. And I think a lot of organizations will take the view that it's much better to be seen the former than the latter. Next slide, please, Andrew. So just very quickly, just touch on cybersecurity against cyber resilience. So these are both areas that we look at. Cybersecurity tends to be what most organizations will look at, and that's preventative, and it's trying to stop these cyber attacks and data breaches from happening. And that needs to include people and process as well as the technical side, and it's obviously critically important. But even when you do those things, there'll always be some element of risk, and there's always be some level of risk that the cyber attacks and data breaches will happen. So preparing for that occurrence is then what you really need to be looking at, and that's the cyber resilience element. Next slide, please, Andrew. So some really important steps in looking at this area and how you do protect yourself from this reputation damage from a data breach. The first one is to accept that cyber risk is very much a business risk, and it's a key risk to your reputation. You need to identify the level of that, which is different for each organization, and particularly look at the level of risk to your clients and your partners. And then you need to work on your prevention, as we mentioned, but then critically, you need to work on your ability to detect a security incident, which might help you prevent it from actually becoming a data breach. And you also need to work on your ability to manage security incidents and data breach. And that's where security incident response plans and data breach plans are really critical. Just going back to something Carol said earlier on, plan for tomorrow, today. I think that's a really good thing to think about in this context as well. What we want to do with a security incident plan or a data breach plan is really know how we're going to deal with that scenario in advance, because the worst thing you can do if you have a cyber attack is be running around trying to figure out what to do. You really want to know what to do in advance. Next slide, please, Andrew. So security incident response plan is something that we work with a lot of our clients on, and we tend to put a very high priority on this. So for a lot of organizations, when we look at their overall security position, we'll actually start to work on their incident response plan before we work on some of their preventative measures. Because even once you've got all your preventative measures in place, you've still got some exposure. And before that, obviously, all the preventative measures take time to implement. So we need to be in a position where if something does happen, we know how to deal with it. And there's some really key things that again often get overlooked when you're looking at how you respond to security incidents. So you need to know what to look for and how to report, and you need to educate everybody in your organization to help you do that. You need to know who's going to be part of your incident response team. You need to know what resources you're going to need to manage that. So where are you going to log the details of incidents? And bear in mind that actually, if you have a significant security incident, some of those systems that you might normally use for that might not be available, including communication systems. So you need to have backups, ready for those as well. High level and detailed processes. You need to know how to communicate, which is absolutely key. So communicating internally with your team, with your staff, with your and then outside with your partners, but also depending on the severity of an incident, you might need to be looking at external, you might need to be looking at PR, you might need to be looking at media, you might need to be looking at external parties like the Information Commissioner's Office, for instance, and law enforcement. So all of those communication mechanisms, you should know how to do those and who to speak to in advance. interaction with other processes and plans like disaster recovery plans, for instance. And then again, really critically, how do you learn lessons? So if you do have a security incident, how do you learn from that incident when it's finished, and how can you do better next time and feed that into your plans going forward? Next slide, please, Andrew. I think the good news is that you can turn this problem into an opportunity. You can, we talked about some of the statistics of, you know, the negative side of it as to the effect of brand damage from a cyber attack on whether people will do business with you. But actually, if you look at these bottom two statistics, if you are doing the right things and you can demonstrate those, then you can set yourself apart from your partners who are perhaps not doing that. So there is a real opportunity to do that. Next slide, please, Andrew. Thank you. So the thing that I've really focused on today, and there's obviously more to it, but one of the really key things in managing it, in protecting your brand and your reputation from damage from cyber attacks and data breaches, is being prepared and having that incident response plan and data breach plan. So where to start with that? A great free resource is the National Cybersecurity Centre. I'd encourage everybody to have a look at that. They've got great information about building an incident response plan and exercising those plans and testing them, as well as a whole load of other information about cybersecurity and what you can do to protect your business. So really recommend that resource. And then from our own point of view, we have actually launched some workshops which are specifically around building incident response plans and helping you to do that yourselves in your organization. So feel free to obviously have a look at our website or contact us separately to have a look at those. We're running those in Norwich and online as well. And obviously, if you have any specific questions, please we'll try and answer them in the sessions now. So thank you, that's me. Thank you, I'll hand back to Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darren. If you bear with us just a moment, we will start the Q&A. Just unmuting and starting videos for our panelists, and then we will begin. Thank you, Carol. Could I hand over to you for the Q&A, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. So as you're on a roll, Darren, I'm going to direct the first question to you that's come through, which is, where should I start when auditing my organisation's cybersecurity? What's job number one?
Job number one it is exactly that, really. So it's really gaining a really good understanding of where you are and where the gaps are in your security, but relevant to your organisation. So I think one sort of key thing to really understand is that when it comes to security of an organisation, there's always a lot of focus on the technical side. And most organisations have done at least something towards that. So we think about the core things like antivirus, we think about firewalls, we think about patching our machines and installing those updates. We think about passwords. So those are mostly technical things, but actually processes, policies, things like incident response plans and things like training your staff are really, really important. So engaging someone who's got who can look at that broad perspective, not only the technical side, and get a really good understanding is good. If a really good starting place again is the National Cybersecurity Centre. Loads of advice on there, tailored for lots of different sizes of organisations, and then obviously to get maybe a broader perspective, obviously you can talk to someone else like ourselves or someone who specialises in security to get that picture.
Great. Can I ask a supplementary question, which I have to say is something that I feel the pain with this one, but I recognise for me it does feel worth the effort, is two-step verification. how actually important is it to
Yeah.
cybersecurity? Because it just feels like sometimes as long as you've got your phone nearby, you're fine. But if you haven't, then you're snookered.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. So A, it's really important. It's I sometimes get asked in presentations, etc. If you could do one thing, if you could advise one thing for organizations to go away and do, which will make a really tangible difference, what would it be? And multi-factor authentication is the one. One of the things you sort of touched on, I think, is that it's one of these things where security is really a real balance. So some of the things we put in place to help with security can make things a little bit slower, and they can make things a little bit more difficult for people to do their jobs. And so you have to get that balance right as an organization of, which ones you implement, which you don't. But multi-factor authentication is one that actually the benefits in the vast majority of cases far outweigh the inconvenience of having to put that code in. Just on the phone thing, I think particularly in Norfolk, we suffer that, because if you're doing it with an SMS based, i.e. a text message that comes to your phone with a code on it, then sometimes we can be in an area where that doesn't come through. There are other ways to do that, which a lot of them are actually more secure. So look at something like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, which, as long as you've got internet access, will enable you to get that code that way, and it's not reliant on your phone signal.
Great, thank you. Bill, a question's come in for you. What's the relationship with trademarks and domain names? The person asking the question said, I'm always getting spam telling me someone else is trying to register my domain name. What's the relationship between those two?
Yeah, great question. If you're getting spammed about someone else trying to register your domain name, it's probably coming from China, and then find the deepest hole, brackets toilet, and throw the thing, the letter or the email in it. Just delete it, ignore it, do not engage. They're just trying to get money out of you.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you, if I may. If I wanted to start a brand, but someone else already has the name, but it's in a different niche or sector, can I still register my name?
It depends. It's a complicated answer, and you have to look at that in each and every case, because if there is enough separation, then it should be okay. And it depends on whether the other person also has their trademark registered, and it depends on how long they've been in business and how widespread their reputation is. Yeah, so the short answer is you need some help to assess it.
A typical lawyer answer there, Bill. Thank you.
I will just say I'm not a lawyer.
This is true.
That's Rachel, my business partner, does the heavy lifting on that work.
So thank you. Another question that's come up is, if I'm looking at my employer brand right now, how will I know whether or not it's good enough for what I need for the future? I'm guessing I'm happy to take that one. I would say that what you do is you start looking at some of the metrics that you have available to you. So, for example, if you're making job offers, what's the acceptance rate look like? How long is it taking you to hire people? When you are recruiting, what are the quality of the candidates that are coming through? When people join you, how long are they staying with you? There are other things that you can do in terms of employee referral schemes. So are your current team happy and prepared to invite others that they know in their circle to come and join you? As well as looking at, actually, are you winning awards as an employer? There's a whole range of different things. But equally, one of the very first things that you can do is do our little survey, which will be on the link that we will email out to you, because that will give you some good insight by asking you some really tricky questions that you can answer honestly and openly with no judgment. So as I say, it gives you a great opportunity to explore your own navel, really, and try and work out where you need to focus on. So I think I can't see that there are any more questions there, Andrew. So if I can pass back to you.
Absolutely, yes. I see no more questions have come in. So Thank you very much for everybody for attending. I'm just going to share my screen so we can show you our thank you slide, because it's nice to be polite. So thank you for joining us. Everyone who attended, we'll send you a recording of the webinar or link to it and copies of the presentations. And unless anybody has any other business, I think we'll conclude today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon at another webinar.